everyone. Welcome to another lesson. And in this lesson, we'll be looking at the concept of hoisting in details, its usefulness, what gets hoisted in JavaScript and what does not, especially when it comes to talking about variable scope in JavaScript. So that's the concept of this lesson, and let's dive in. What exactly is hoisting in JavaScript? Hoisting is JavaScript's behavior of moving declarations to the top of their screen before the code runs. So this is basically saying that before your code runs in JavaScript, JavaScript is aware of your code, is aware of, you know, of maybe an action or something that you want to perform. JavaScript is aware of it. And so hoisting is now the behavior of JavaScript programming language that moves declarations to the top of their scope before the code runs. So which means that if you have things like variables, function, expression, or whatever it is, JavaScript is aware of it before it starts executing your code. And so hoisting lets JavaScript move declarations to the top of their scope. And what are the declarations in this instance? We are talking about when you have variables, when you have, functions, or have variables in function, and some other things like that. So hoisting is what allows JavaScript to behave by moving declarations to the top of their scope before the code runs, because JavaScript executes from top to the bottom when you have a program or a code in it. Now, JavaScript knows about variables and functions before it executes the code. Like I said, JavaScript is aware of variables and functions, things that you have in your code before it runs. So it knows about it. It knows where to start running. It knows where to start execution of your program. And only declarations are hoisted in JavaScript are not values. You will realize that the other time when we try to initialize a variable with let and const keyword after it has been declared, we were getting reference error. We couldn't achieve it because let and const weren't allowing that in that lesson. And it was for the simple reason that let and const cannot be declared before initialization, which means that if you try to declare a variable with either let or const keyword, and you now try to initialize it later, it will throw an error, which is to tell you that declaration before initialization of variables is a bad practice as a developer, which is one of the things that you must avoid for surprises and inconsistent, behavior in your code. So that's the purpose of declaring variables and giving them value at the point of declarations. Now, what are the things that get hoisted in JavaScript? Now, when you have variable declarations with var and when you have functions declarations, so these two things get hoisted in JavaScript. And what are the things that do not get hoisted? When you have variables initialization, which means that if you have a variable declaration before initialization, JavaScript does not move initialization to the top. After it is initialized, it stays where it is, which is the reason why you always get a reference error when you try to use let or const with variable initialization. So those doesn't get hoisted in JavaScript. Let and const keyword, they have a temporal dead zone, like we saw in the last video. When you try to declare variable first and then initialize it with let and or const keyword, it leads to the temporal dead zone, which means you get a reference error of maybe a variable is not defined before initialization, something like that. The kind of error that you get in your console for it. So let and const values that they give you a temporal dead zone. So they are not hoisted in JavaScript, which means they are not moved to the top before execution in JavaScript. And then function expression. Remember when we talked about arrow functions, that arrow functions are not hoisted, function expression, that functions expression are not hoisted. When we, the lesson where we talked about arrow functions and then using it as an expression, you realize that you cannot hoist it, you cannot declare it before using it. You cannot call it before declaration. So it has to be declared before use. If not, you get a reference error. So now, what is now the usefulness of this hoisting to a developer or to someone who is writing a JavaScript program? Number one is that if a developer doesn't understand hosting, if a developer doesn't understand scope of variables, of functions, expressions, or function itself, program may contain bugs. The program might contain errors. And I want to quickly remind us that when we talked about strict mode, do not forget that strict mode allows us to catch bugs early in our code. But in normal JavaScript without strict mode, there are some practices that might lead to errors, that might lead to bugs, but will not be caught as you continue to program in the normal, JavaScript way. But strict mode allow all these bugs to be, detected earlier in your code, which makes you to have a reliable code as you write and then execute a program that is in strict mode. And that is the difference between working in strict mode and working in a normal, JavaScript environment without enforcing the strict mode. There are some practices that are wrong, but will not show you an error and it will still run. And you think that it is the normal way of, actually doing it in JavaScript. So another reason is that when you need to avoid bugs, it is always the best practice to declare all your variables at the beginning of every scope. Now, understanding scope with all the lessons that we've talked about has shown clearly to us that without an understanding of how scope works in JavaScript, you are likely going to have a program that contains bugs. And you're likely going to run into an issue long after you may have gone far in your program if you do not understand how hoisting works in JavaScript. So all variables are, recommended to be declared and assigned values at the beginning of every scope in order not to cause surprises or inconsistency. And lastly, the last usefulness is that since that is how JavaScript is that treats code, by moving code to the top and then execute it from top downward, it is always a good practice in order to avoid surprises from the outcome of your code. So I want to just quickly bring it to our memory. Yes. I want to quickly bring it to our memory by commenting these examples that we have earlier. You see what we have here. That this is a very good practice of how variables should be used and then maintained in JavaScript. Now look at it. So this has a value of 5 and this has a value of 10. The two are declared and initialized at the same spot where they were declared. And so this will not give any surprise as we continue. Unlike when we bring this one here and I have something like this. Now you can see the results undefined. So one is getting the correct output and the other one is getting undefined. So to avoid all this inconsistency, it is always a good practice to declare your variables at the beginning of every script. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next lesson.